CPA Benedict A. Omollo is here this morning. Do you like how I have introduced you?
Very good.
However, we want to know what A means.
Abonyo.
Benedict Abonyo Omollo. You see, one of the few people who will actually tell us what the middle initial means. And so we are proud of you and we celebrate you this morning. Ndu, Mark, Dennis here with you this morning. And Ben is here, and we're going to be talking about a number of things today. You're in the hot seat. We know you, obviously, because we used to, trump these walls together.
Correct. Yeah.
But then getting towards county and doing, quite a lot in finance, and then even before that at the judiciary. Mm-hmm. So there's a conglomeration here of experience that allows us to then have these finance conversations, right. And we're very happy that you can join us this morning to do that.
Thank you.
We're going to welcome you to the Situation Room and put you to work off the jump. Mark is going to share today's proverb. He'll tell you where it's from, and then we are looking for your wisdom of interpretation to that.
It's interesting. I've met this gentleman before, and he had the very humble experience of not telling me he was CPA. I'm glad to know because he was doing something very different. Now, since you've got a wealth of experience, there's a country that whose president wanted to make sure that Africa has one currency. Do you remember that president? Mm-hmm. Well, where he comes from, they also had wahenga. Mm-hmm. Now wahenga hao wakasema, if the sun starts to move west, find a shady tree. That's from Libya. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, the president was Muammar Gaddafi.
Yes. Wanted to have the African dinner.
Yes. Correct.
Yes. So
which I think we should still aspire to. We need to get a currency.
Just don't fly anywhere when you say such things.
Yes.
Yeah. So sun starts moving west, find a shady tree. What do you think?
I think the proverb talks about as the sun rises then, and the heat then comes through, find a place where you can get good refuge or shelter. And so, I think it's an interesting one when you think about the desert. You would need to have a place where when it gets too hot,
yes,
you can then get the shade under the tree and find some rest before you move on with your activities.
It's interesting. How many people have trees for life?
Yes.
When things get hard, where's your tree?
That's interesting. Not literally, actually. Well, okay. I mean, it's great about interpretation, isn't it? Because your opinion then can actually shed light onto many things. And so can your experiences. So we're in budget season, finance, everybody's talking, buzzing, tax regimes, and everybody's asking many different questions. But for us to understand the process of what gets us to where we are today, where there's a finance bill that is being discussed, there will be public participation for the finance bill in a very short while. I believe the end of that is 25th of May. Because then we get into a new financial year for the government, at least, then come June. But we talk about it as though it was over the weekend that somebody said, well, let's rustle up a budget, shall we? And let's tell people that this is how we're going to spend the money and this is where we're going to get it from. For us to understand what's happening now, perhaps it's best that we understand what has been happening for the last 6 months or so. So, in order for us to gain that understanding, Ben, I think it's important that we can say the process of budgeting, the finance bill where we are today, that, if all things remaining constant within the bill, it will become an act. And then it, is essentially law from the 1st of July. So what happens before this that gets us to the place where we are today? And I think that's where we'd like to start off this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And pleasure to meet each of you, Dennis, Mark, and Du again, to be here. I think the events of June 2024 were a culmination of the budget process and has brought in an increased sense of civic engagement, which is a positive thing. However, we need to look at the budget process beyond the finance bill. The finance bill is really the tail end of the process. And so our anger, which is justified, in my view, is misplaced when we get a bit too animated and angry at the finance bill. And so one of the things that I would want to do is to just help us understand that the budgeting process actually begins in August.
Yeah.
And so 31st, or on the 30th of August, I think the latest is 31st of August, the Cabinet Secretary issues a circular, which then charts out the various dates and events that will happen in terms of the budget for the subsequent year. Now, it's important for us to remember we've just begun the new financial year in terms of implementation. And then the month next, a new budgeting cycle begins. And so we've got to have these two things happening concurrently. You're implementing the active budget and you're starting the next one.
Yes.
After the circular is released, at the county level, the County Executive Committee member for Finance and Economic Planning, or for Finance, which is really the core and planning, will then domesticate that and contextualize it as well. Because then the CEC also issues a circular from the county treasury, which also now provides the calendar for the county budget process.
Yeah.
So I will try to provide first the one for the national government, and then I'll go to the county government one. So with the national government, immediately that circular is put in place. The next particular document that will be required is on the 30th of September, where you then have got the budget review and outlook paper, which is the BROP. Now, the budget review and outlook paper requires that you look at the previous financial year. So for this particular one would be 24-25.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what really happened in 24-25? And then you bring in, you review the budget policy statement, and you also start giving an outlook for the 26-27, which is going to be your budget period. Subsequent to that, they will then prepare the budget policy statement, the BPS. Now, the BPS is fundamentally where the plans of the government get captured. Now, this is required by 15th February for the national government, and then to submit it to Parliament, and then they should be able to approve it in 14 days. After that, you then have got the budget estimates. Now, the budget policy statement is very important. So let me just drill down on it a bit. It has got both the expenditures and the revenues. There's a policy document that is required, which is the revenue-raising measures. Now, the revenue-raising measures will indicate how the government intends to raise its funding. Okay? Now, that is what gets formalized in the finance bill.
Yes.
So it's very important that we interrogate this revenue-raising measure policy at that point. Because if that doesn't get challenged, that is what gives birth to the finance bill. Because the finance bill basically is a formalization of the revenue-raising measures and then becomes the act.
So, sorry, Ben, a quick one before you go to that point. So essentially, public participation, should it take place for the revenue-raising measures or the finance bill? Because if what you're saying is the case, it's done and dusted. This baby has been born. Should you ask questions at the stage before it becomes the bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Because budget, the public participation is at every stage.
Yeah.
So even the BROP, budget review and outlook paper, there is public participation. The budget policy statement, there is public participation. Now, the budget policy statement also comes, there's a revenue-raising measure, and then there's also the debt strategy management paper. Okay? So again, for us to get annoyed about our debt position, it's found therein. And therefore, this February season, maybe we get caught up with Valentine's. But at that particular period is when we have all these things going on. Okay?
Yes.
So this budget policy statement is what ultimately will end up, once approved by Parliament, will end up into what would be the budget estimates, which are due by 30th April, submitted to the National Assembly, and then, of course, Parliament and the judiciary submit directly to Parliament. And then, at the end of the day, you have 2 months. They have to be approved by 30th of June. Now, what gives effect to the expenditure side is that once Parliament approves the budget estimate, you then have the appropriation bill, which then gets assented to, and then you've got the Appropriation Act.
Okay.
Now, 90 days, the finance bill has got some window because there's a window of 90 days between when the Appropriation Act is enacted to when the finance bill must then be concluded. Okay. So the finance bill tends to go after.
Yeah.
I find that odd. I think we need to find a way in which the finance bill and the Appropriation Act, so you should have the Finance Act and the Appropriation Act going together.
Yes.
The reason why I have a problem with the delay is that if the finance bill gets changed, okay, it means that technically you will reduce your revenue side and you'll have a deficit because your expenditure is already approved. Okay? So we need to find a way in which we harmonize the two. Okay?
Quick one.
Yeah.
As you talk about harmonizing, and I like how deep you've gone, let me take you back to August, because I think many Kenyans miss this. Government is not the executive and county governments alone. Every government department, parastatal, whatever, has its own budget making process, correct?
Yes.
Is it true that, let's say I have an interest in tourism, that I can go and do public participation at the Kenya Tourism Board and say, this is what I would like to be done, and give it as an idea to them, so that now Kenyans are not doing public participation on a big document that has so many details, but you can pick either the area you're interested in, the department you're interested in. You're a tea farmer, you're a coffee farmer, you're a maize farmer. You can actually begin to affect the process of budgeting right from the department itself.
Yeah. I think the main issue with public participation here is that you can give your opinion and your feedback on your area of interest. And I think that's the whole philosophy of public participation, is to give your input into the process.
Yes.
Of course, what happens is that the budget circular provides the guidance even to the ministries, departments, and agencies of government in terms of what they will do.
Yeah.
And then specifically for the national government, they would then have the various sector working groups. So basically, the way the national government does it is that they have got sector working groups, which then consolidates different ministries or departments together in thematic areas, and that is where you'd be able to give your feedback when they have their public participation. Now, of course, the main issue is to look at the trends, what's happening, and how it would impact you. So the new constitution expected us to participate more so that then there's a sense of engagement with our leadership. If you then allow me, then I could go through the one for the county, which also starts again in August, with the CEC for Finance then issuing a circular that will guide the county and its entities in terms of the budget process.
I think it's good for us to say that, you did serve as a CEC for Finance in CI County.
Yes.
So this is where a lot of this also would then come in terms of practice. So it's good for us to say that. Okay.
Correct. So you then issue that circular. And then for the county, they have got the annual development plan, which is extracted from the county integrated development plan, which is the 5-year plan that the county develops. Now, once you have the CIDP, every year you extract what your emphasis will be for that particular year, which is due and submitted to the assembly on 1st September. Now, after that, you have got also the county, it's called the CBROP, County Budget Review and Outlook Paper. So similar to the one for the national government, the county does it. Again, there's still public participation, and you've got to publish. There are two things that the Constitution and the various laws, especially the PFM, talks about. You are expected to publish and publicize these documents, okay, on the website, and also make them available so that there would be engagement. So the CBROP is then required by the end of September. Subsequent to that, you engage in what is the county fiscal and strategy paper. So that's the other critical one at the county level, the county fiscal strategy paper, which is due on 28th February. Also on 28th February, we submit the county debt strategy management paper. Now, counties rarely get into debt. I think most counties would only have the salary arrangement with banks. But to get into a debt or to get a debt instrument, you need approval of the National Assembly. So it's a very difficult process. I think as part of reviewing the Constitution, we need to look at that and see, because I think some counties have a valid reason and basis upon which they could borrow. And perhaps do something. In any case, we are all paying for the debts, some of which we don't know even how they were borrowed. So perhaps we need to look at that if there's discipline. And then there's also the revenue-raising measure for the counties that are developed, which then will transition into the finance bill. Subsequent to that is the budget estimates, which are done based on the county fiscal strategy paper once it's approved by the county assembly. And then that is submitted on 30th April as well. And then they have 2 months where now you've got the rigor of public participation before it is approved by 30th of June, so that the next financial year they would be able to start with approved documents. You then have your appropriation bill and any other bills that would give effect to the budget. So those are the parallel processes that happen. The timelines are more or less similar for national. The only one is a budget policy statement, which is earlier by about 2 weeks for the national government, because it is expected that before you finalize the county fiscal strategy paper, then you have aligned it with the budget policy statement of the national government, so that then there's harmony between the national government and its plans and the county plans as well.
Counties have been accused of not absorbing funds, and of course there's the delays of funds coming from government and all of that. So when funds are not absorbed, rather not used according to the purpose they were supposed to be done, how does that then affect the next budgeting cycle? Second question, how seriously are the comments from the public taken by these institutions and sector working groups in terms of actually informing the policy, given that many of these departments and ministries have up to 5 years strategic plans?
Okay. In terms of the budget, I think we've got to distinguish the budget and cash, which is what you get from the treasury in terms of the share of the equitable share of the counties, which is the bulk, because the county revenues tend to be maybe 10-15%. I don't think any county has reached over 20%. Maybe Nairobi County could, if they collect well. Now, what normally happens with the delays, because then when you have got delay of remittances, sometimes the treasury would send, especially the last quarter, they would tend to send 3 or 4 months worth of funds in the month of June. Or what then happens is that you have a lot of rollovers. So you have projects that have not been fully paid in the previous financial year that you now carry forward, and you will regularize this in the supplementary budget. What then happens is that you have a delay because you then have got cash or funds. But the other risk you do have, if you do not have a county treasury that is disciplined, is that money could get diverted. Because remember, there's a lot of pressure that comes and you have this bulk of money. That fiscal discipline, if it is not adhered to, could lead to a lot of abuse and misapplication of funds. So we've got to find a way in which we send or remit money to the counties on a regular basis as per the Constitution, which requires that there's reasonable predictability. What we need is for the counties to be able to get their funds in a predictable manner so that they are able to then implement their programs. On your second question of public participation, as much as possible, one would try. What I did myself would be to attend a couple of these, just so to get a feeling. But let me then give the example of Siaya. If you say Siaya has got about 900,000 to about 1 million people, divide by 30 wards, because public participation occurs at the wards, you would then have on average, about 30,000 people per ward, let's assume. If even 1,000 per ward sends feedback, or participate, you could end up with 30,000. Now, what do they say?
Yeah.
People are as varied as you could think.
Yes.
So somebody would say, I want a well, another one wants an ACD, another one wants this project. And so harmonizing that is very, very difficult. You'd try to see what are the sounding effects that then get a common denominator, and so you say, let's give that emphasis. But one of the things that is required is to just give a summary of what people were saying, and then you could pick at least some. What I would do was to get the summary of the public participation and put that before the county executive committee, and then we would see what are the top 10 things that we need to pick that the public have said. But of course, the emphasis is always on your county integrated development plan or your annual development plan and your county fiscal strategy paper.
Yes.
So if they get harmonized with the public views on an ongoing basis, then there's a higher chance that by the time when you have your budget estimates, they are aligned and have picked some of the critical issues that the residents have required of you, so that then you are solving a real problem.
Okay. My question, looking at the very nuanced understanding of the country's fiscal and landscape, and going back to last year, how open, and maybe to explain it to the mamamboga, the boda, because we keep talking about public participation, and this animal called public participation, tying it into transparency, because we have until May 27th. The question is, how do we ensure that there is transparency, there is openness, and very genuine public participation in terms of getting the views around the budget? How serious are we in taking these views into account? And as you answer that, how does it work to the mamamboga who wants the views to be heard getting into this budget-making process?
I think, in my view, there seems to be a difference when you look at it from a county perspective and from the national perspective in terms of the mamamboga, boda, hustler narrative. What I noticed at the county level is that the MCAs tend to be a little bit more connected with the people. So the finance bill, though you approved, and the House, the Assembly approved the revenue-raising policy, when you translate it into the finance bill, they have an eye on the finance bill. Because for them, every vote counts.
Yes.
Now, you have a very odd situation at the county level where you have an approved revenue-raising measure, but you'll find the MCAs would be, and the Committee of Finance, would be a little bit more detailed in terms of even just raising the market fees.
Yeah.
Because they know the noise of the market fees. Or saying you want to charge, I remember one of the things in Siaya, which Kakamega was successful in doing, is to generate a fee for the boda. We struggled with it. And by the time I left, we had not done it. Because for them, that is a core constituency. Now, at the national level, it seems that our MPs seem a little bit more disconnected with our views, such that even, because if you take the one for last year, with all the noise that was made about it, they were still able to vote. Now, I think the issue of representation at the national level seems a little bit disconnected when you look at representation at the county level. That would be my view, because what I have seen is that the MCAs tend to be very, very careful. And when you get the public participation, the thing which I also find odd is that the executive will do a public participation, then the assembly will do a public participation, and the two sometimes don't harmonize. Because when you go out as executive, they're very clear, you want to do this, so you connect your revenue-raising measures to projects. But when the assembly goes, it seems to be a bit different, because they listen to the constituents.
Yes.
Okay? And so they could come back in their report and say, no, we will not raise this particular fee by the intended amount. I remember the last time I was there, I was raising a lot of their hospital fees. And that was a big issue. For us was, you have done a hospital, now you need to get the fees, you've improved the facility so that it can sustain itself. But to them is, the Mamboga cannot afford that fee. It cannot be done. So you then have got to negotiate and get to a better level. So in terms of what one would say the representation, at the county level, the public participation seems to be more in tune. And you'll actually find a place where the members of the county assembly will completely change or veto or completely refuse an aspect of the finance bill because of what they think the people, or they feel the people have said this one will not happen. So that, I feel, is a disconnect. That at the national level, our finance bill, the representation by our MPs does not seem to pick our emotions and our feedback.
One of the things that we complain about as Kenyans, it's rarely the services, because when they're building roads, we're happy. When the telephone lines are working, all of those things, fine, good. The bane of contention is always the taxation, all right? How much are we being charged for this levy fund there? Can the average Kenyan influence that process? Can he get to a point where, whether it's a lobby group, 1,000 people at the county saying, you know what, this border fee of 500, we don't want it. How possible is it for Kenyans to actually affect that process?
I think we need to go back to history because I think as Kenyans, perhaps we miss that connection. If you remember well, in 2002, 2003, when Mwai Kibaki became president, the very fact that things started changing, I think it was the first week, free primary education, then there was this emphasis on infrastructure. If you remember, it was maybe 2004 or 2005 when we began... filing our tax returns. You remember they started off this process of getting us to file our returns, pick these things from Uchumi, fill them, and take them. It was convenient. Before that, we were not doing those things. But we started filing these returns. In my view, once Kenyans were able to connect service delivery with taxation, then generally they have no problem with taxation. We could see what was happening. Okay? And the economy was thriving. I think that was the point where interest rates fell. The banks had these tents on every street like shoe shiners. That is when some of us borrowed our first unsecured loans. I remember borrowing 100,000. I can't even remember what I took it for. I think I took it because every other 200 meters there was a bank asking you to take money.
You to take a loan,
So we took money.
But
the connection here is the fact that Kenyans were able to see service delivery. And therefore, the issue of taxation was not a problem. Perhaps what is becoming a problem with this regime is that service delivery does not seem to be connected to taxation. And that is where then you have a problem, because you're saying, what am I getting for this levy? Okay? The question, and even if you ask even the market fees or the border people, even if you're taking 5 bob a day from every border that's registered, the question they'll ask you is, what service are you giving us? If you don't have those shades for them, or the markets don't have basic infrastructure like ablution blocks, flowing water, it's cleaned, then they will ask the question, what are you charging me for? And so I think that the critical aspect for government is to deliver. People must see closure of certain of these projects. I think we have got an over-engagement with launching projects and promises of more projects without necessarily the people seeing the closure. We must see the closure that this project has been done. It's being used. There is value for money from that particular investment. You cannot continue just levying and promising. I think that's where we have a problem then as a government entity, whether the county or national level.
But my question is now, before the border guy gets this 400 bob a day that he needs to pay, or 50 bob a day, can they, as a border association, and I know there are many, actually lobby to, in the entire process of budgeting, to ensure that they're saying that this thing you're talking about, we don't want because we had it last year and it did not bear fruit for us?
Yes. They are free to come. They are free. You can send a written memorandum, but they can attend. A good number of them do attend. The public participation at the county level. A good number of them do attend, and they are able to give their views on what needs to be done. Yes.
Can we see that, usually we say that the process has to live out, just like you're saying, that it would be good for people to say, we said we're going to spend 100,000 shillings on this. We've actually seen, here is the thing upon which 100,000 shillings was spent. But in my opinion, and maybe now from, you can let us know, is this budget making process, a lot of the angst that comes with it, which is important for us to put together in this whole thing, is that sadly we cannot always see the end result, that it doesn't seem to live out the fullness of the channel. Like we talk in communication circles, communication is not just me telling you something. I need to be able to hear back from you, then I can know if my communication process was complete or not. If you go into the process, you do all of these things, you have public participation, and you say, okay, fine, this is the money that we have, this is what we're going to do with it. Can we say that the budget process has been successful if we don't see that the things we said were going to be done with this fund were not done?
It would not be successful, but for me, who has been both in the private sector, development world, and then public sector, I think the big challenge tends to be what you'd call, I don't know whether to call it pragmatic or the political realities. Because what you then find is a lot more competition of what needs to be done. And then the politicians tend to lose the focus and then go into something else. So that then the challenge becomes looking through and seeing a harmonized way in which the money is being spent in a structured format that will lead us to a specific destination. That for me is where the problem is. So that then, for example, even as you look at the better, the current government agenda, they started off with all these county aggregation and industrial parks. I'm not sure any is complete 3 years down the line. So these are the kind of things which, in principle, the idea is very noble, makes a lot of sense. But the money is not put in. Maybe they started too many at the same time trying to get to every county. Perhaps they should have started with only a limited number. But the political noise would be, how did you select the first 12? And what happens to the next 35? But in trying to do the whole 47, then you have all the 47 at different stages. You're not getting anything out. I think as a country and as a people, we need to be able to say, okay, let's have a structured, disciplined approach to getting things done. Okay, our big failure is completion. And even if it is a multi-year project, can we be very clear that this is a 2-year project and give it sufficient money so that then it gets done? Otherwise, again, when you have got infrastructure being done for 3-4 years, and the contractors have got all these escalation clauses that they are allowed to adjust the prices, and then we'll come back here and we'll have, what's his name? Morara Kebaso saying it started at 2 million, ended up at 100 million. But you've opened a window where it's crazy, because why was a project that could have been done in 6 months or 1 year end up being done in 5 years? So we need to be able to ensure that we are appropriating sufficient funds, and then we are monitoring it, so that then you're monitoring the project and getting it done, so that the issue should be ROI, the return on investment.
Go ahead.
My question goes back to something that you mentioned during the break, and it's around the budget making process and the culture around it. There seems, before we even talk about public participation, there seems to be a detachment. When you look, for example, Parliament was probing the issue of the Education Ministry over a lack of budget for our exams, 0 shillings allocated for national exams, the school feeding program. And you look at the figures, and then you compare to the figures that have been mentioned in making sure that we have good-looking state lodges and a very good-looking state house.
State house.
How far are we so detached from the realities before we even talk about public participation? You're making this budget and you're prioritizing these areas and you're looking at all these things and you're thinking, let's deduct this from this, let's remove this, let's remove that. How far are we detached in terms of the budget making culture in making some of these decisions?
I think it's important that when budgets are being made, you need to be able to determine what are the essential or critical expenditure that must be provided for. For example, if you're looking at health, which is devolved, how much have we provided for medication, med and non-med items? Okay, that's critical. You've got to look at things like wages, critical, especially for critical staff. Have we provided for it? Now, examination, unless they are proposing, and I haven't seen a levy being proposed that the parents will pay that examination fee, that's a critical expenditure. And so it has got to be provided for. So it's important to be able to tell that essential and critical expenditure have been provided for before you go to the ones which could be discretionary. Things like improving the state lodges would tend to be discretionary, in my view. It's just the same. The issues of personal finance also apply in public finance. If you're tight on your household budget, surely essentials would be school fees, food,
rent.
But to start improving the upholstery, of course, unless you are from my place, having a TV of 60 inches is critical.
In a 62-inch house.
Correct. That one would be critical. But other than that, we must be clear that this is critical expenditure or essential expenditure, and it is adequately provided for.
Right.
And so that is part of the discipline. I think as we go through, and there is the new change to the zero-based budget, that will help a little bit, because the zero-based budgeting requires that you justify every expenditure. But it is important to have developed the framework, because then you must capture the essential costs, and then you justify even those essential costs, so that you then come up with a basis for each and every expenditure or vote or line item. So the zero-based budget may help us be able to determine what is important, what is critical, and what then would be discretionary.
Okay.
I have a quick question. We've talked about the pre-process. And now I'm thinking about the projects that governments do before Morara Kebaso shows up and tells us what hasn't happened. I know Parliament is supposed to provide oversight, but how can I, as a private citizen, let's say I'm interested in the stadium that's being built near Junction, how can I access the information so that I know I can raise alarm, I can raise concern, I can give flowers where they're due to the government for what they're doing in terms of time? Because I think one of the problems we have as a country is, how do we access the information to be able to assess government projects?
Okay. So generally what would happen is that each county and even the national treasury are required to provide financial statements. And we do quarterly financial statements. Now, the reports of the control of budget would ordinarily capture the expenditures, and specifically for the bigger projects, they would. However, you may also need to just drill down into that specific project, because she may capture it or may not, depending on the threshold. Because remember, the infrastructure projects in a county could average 1,000. So if you talk about 50,000 projects being monitored, some would have to be dropped when you're doing a report of the nature that the control of budget would do. So drilling down to it would be a challenge. So you'd then need to go to the county. But the big ones, generally, you'd be able to get how much is being spent, because she then does the what you'd call the budget implementation status reports. Now, the payment would be the basis upon which you'd use it. But nothing stops you from asking at the specific county where you have got the interest for any project, because this is Article 35 information. You should be able to have access to information. You can write and inquire so that you see that what is the status of this Talanta sports ground, what has been done, how much was budgeted for it, and where are we at. So that access to that information is generally available. But the control of budget report would be your first stop.
Okay. There's so many, they've almost become buzzwords that we then have to look at when we look at, government expenditure later. And one of those is budgeted corruption. When we look at wastage at the budget level and then at the expenditure level, what is the situation? How bad does it actually look when we're talking about some of the things, when the gaps that come into play here and there? Do we see money slipping through the cracks that essentially would have gone towards development?
I think the issue here is around discipline and fiscal discipline and reasonableness, because I think that's part and parcel of the public participation, where we can ask about the budgets. You see, if we interrogate the documents well, then we can ask, why would a project that essentially you can estimate is 10 million is being budgeted at 15, 20 or 30 million. So that's an important aspect. And so part and parcel of public participation is interrogation of those numbers. Now, a good number of us don't get any excitement or satisfaction from numbers, but at this point one needs to be able to just look at them and ask as to the reasonableness. Of course, the other thing would also be under the National Treasury or even the county treasuries could be able to provide and say, because I think we try to do this in Siaya, you try to come up with, for example, what is the approximate cost per kilometer of an earth road, of a tarmac road, to then help you get a general justification for a number. So that if I'm doing 20 kilometers, then I just multiply X by 20. So it's important that we get some of these estimates that are agreed upon.
Standard.
Like a standard thing. Of course, construction would be different, because you could go dig down and then you find a different situation, which can always be explained. But the general principles of saying, on average, it should cost you X to achieve something. So, for example, we came up with an approximation for an ECD. ECDs, I think we came up with about 4 million. You should be able to get an ECD. So that should be able to help so that then there's a correlation between a cost and what should be delivered. The other thing that we could also look at is come up with reasonable timelines. What is a timeline to build something? How long would it take to do a stadium? I know the one in Sierra took quite a number of years, but now it's complete.
Okay. Complete or complete?
You can always improve these things. But it is
complete.
We should have what you'd call practical completion, that it can be used. Okay. Now, if you want to flower it up by having a better canopy, and extras, that is different. But we must have, for a hospital, what is practical completion? For a classroom, what is practical completion? You can always make it better, flower it up, but we must be able to say practical completion and within this time frame, and that's reasonable, because we have engineers, we have all these experts who can help, and I think as we go to zero-based budgeting, some of these are the assumptions we should bring in. There are lots of practices in the private sector that you just bring and contextualize for the public sector and improve the efficiency of our budget making process.
Dennis?
As I look at this budget making process, and I'm thinking about last year, and I'm thinking about between now and the passing of the bill, how can Kenyans constructively contribute? And this is what I mean. Typically, I write a memo as Bichachi, Dennis does a tweet, speaks on a microphone. How do we effectively, one, be able to speak to legislators? Because I think they're hard of hearing, especially on this NGCDF kind of things. How do we effectively tell a parliamentarian that, listen, we, the people of Nyandarua, of Nakuru, of wherever, are in opposition to this. We agree to this, and we want you to represent us in the way we want. Because I honestly think if the MPs last year did what their constituents were telling them, it would be effective. And I'm borrowing this from the United States. United States, when Congress goes to recess, they are forced to go to town halls to listen to their constituents, and then they're able to know what these constituents of theirs actually want. How, in your imagination, both as a former CEC and a Kenyan, how can we actually make that happen?
One, I think we need to engage, and we're already engaging. Let's send the written memorandums. Let's go to the town halls and participate when they are advertised.
Yeah.
But I think essentially we should then ask, and it is required. One of the things when you read the PFM, the Public Finance Management Act, is that the CEC for Finance and even the CS, when they get the feedback of the National Assembly or the County Assembly on the budget policy statement, or even especially like the budget policy statement, and there's a deviation, you do a memorandum back to the House on how you have dealt with their recommendations.
Yes.
I think perhaps we need Parliament then, or even the county executives in each county, to then also write back and publicize that the feedback we received, 2,000 Kenyans do not want Talanta.
Yes.
50,000 Kenyans do not want State House improved.
Yes.
Okay,
leave it alone.
You bring that out and say let's list out the top 20 issues.
Yeah,
and the whole document or the total feedback needs to be available for verification, so that even when I see the feedback of Parliament and Parliament says, okay, these were the memorandums, this is what we found and stuff, and that we got, there is the supporting documentation that we can verify. Okay, we do not want, remember that time when we had fake people signing a petition and we had signatures of all manner of characters. So we need a good memory, sir. We need things to be verifiable, and so we could be able to say that this is why we took this decision. And I think we need Kenyans to be able to continuously put pressure on our members. Now that we also have IEBC, maybe Kenyans also need to sit down very critically and say, okay, if we're going to spend 62 billion anyway, then let's do a recall. We remove a few people and exercise our constitutional rights.
Make it sound right.
So, I think those are some of the things I would say that they publish what was done and why they have decided to take a certain route, so that then there's a sense of accountability of the leaders on the feedback of the people.
And make it known. Look, it's always good to hear some of these things and have them front and center. Discourse is important. It's good for us to keep them right here on fingertips. And so we want to thank you for your contribution to that this morning.
Thank you very much.
CPA Benedict A. Omollo has been here with us this morning. Good to have you in the Situation Room. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.